Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Light's not on.
Hello and welcome to Telecom 2019, the update. I'm Donna Richardson. I'm the Cable Administrator for Howard County, Maryland. I welcome you here this afternoon. Thank you so much. I'm going to go real short on the bios because I know you can pick them up off the app and off the website. But I wanted to thank our three panelists that are here with us today, Gary Resnick, Gail Karish, and Ken Fellman. So Gary is a shareholder with Gray Robinson, PA, and concentrates his practice in the representation of local governments and private clients in government and regulatory affairs, communications, cable and broadband law, charter schools, and land use. He's the only elected official on the panel as the mayor of Wilton Manors, Florida. He also served as the chair of the FCC Intergovernmental Advisory Committee. Gail Karish is a partner with Best & Krieger. She focuses on telecommunications, assisting public agency clients with a wide range of advisory, regulatory, and transactional matters involving wireless communications, smart city infrastructure, cable and telecom franchising, broadband, and fiber networks and public-private partnerships. Ken Fellman is a partner in the Denver law firm of Kissinger and Fellman, PC. He represents local governments nationally regarding cable matters, community broadband deployment, and public safety communications. Ken is also the former president of NATOA, has testified on NATOA's behalf in the U.S. House and Senate, and is also chair of the Local and State Government Advisory Committee. Thank you very much.
We're up. All right.
And Gary's up first.
Thanks. Thanks, Donna, and good afternoon. Before I begin with my actual presentation, I figured some of you people may not even know what this is, but for millennials, how many people have you heard of Blockbuster? Let me just explain it to millennials. Blockbuster was, in the 80s, was the biggest competitor to cable. And what it was actually a video store, and for those who aren't familiar with that, it's a place that held tapes that you could actually go in and look around and then buy, rent something that you would actually go home and insert in a VCR, and I won't even try to explain what a VCR was. But, so Blockbuster was actually founded by, I'm from Wilton Manors, Florida, which is next to Fort Lauderdale, on the other side of Florida. And the wealthiest, most active business person in Fort Lauderdale was a guy named Wayne Huizinga. He started AutoNation, he started a garbage company, and he started Blockbuster. And Blockbuster was the one that made him the most money, believe it or not. And but Blockbuster now is a candle, and it's a fond, and the candle says fond memory, and the scent is something like BO and some weird carpet smell. So the reason I wanted to show that is because these things that we're living now, particularly with cable and the deregulation and the preemption and everything that's occurring at the federal level, at the state level, is hopefully going to be a fond memory. And we just have to figure out what flavor candle to make for O'Reilly and Pie, because hopefully they'll be, I think Pie probably likes apple or cherry or something, but we'll have to figure out what his favorite flavor pie is. And they can be a fond memory going forward too. So we're providing a telecom update. I told Ken I'd go to beat him on jokes today. I think I did. But, so we're providing a telecom update, and you've heard it all week. This is, to some extent, this is a lot of what you've heard already this week at NATOA, but we're going to get a little bit more into the weeds on certain things. Can you put my next, is there a clicker here for next? Got it. Yeah. Maybe not. Yeah, I know. I could work my VCR. Well, I actually could never program my VCR.
Is that one of your jokes, Gary?
Yes. All right. Just go to this one. All right. Not me. All right, thanks. So what I'm going to cover, and we're all divided up, basically the update, but what I'm going to cover is federal law, and actually today is the effective date of the FCC cable franchise fee order. And so it's, I guess, coincidence or not that we're actually talking about this week, and today, actually, I'm going to focus on that order. I'm going to cover also state law. There's about 23 states that have preempted local governments with respect to small cell infrastructure siting. So I'm going to cover state law, and what I'm going to cover is what I'm most familiar with is Florida statute. But the other state statutes are very similar to Florida's, particularly since they were written by the industry. And so the different state statutes are very, very similar. And I'm going to also cover, there's litigation that we filed on behalf of the Florida League of Cities challenging portions of the Florida small cell statute. I'm going to talk about that. And there we go. And so I'm going to cover a little bit about the, I'll cover the details of the legislation, the statute. It was amended in 2019, that just became effective July 1st. And I'll talk about the litigation that's going on. So the FCC cable franchise fee order, you've heard about that already. As I said, it becomes effective today. It's our newest favorite thing. It's just another example of the federal government basically preempting cities and counties, and in this case also states. What's interesting is the president at his UN speech on Monday said that America is a nation of self-governance. But in this case, you've got 3 unelected officials who are just bureaucrats who've never been elected in Washington, D.C., dictating to all of America how they shall well, basically how they shall regulate their own communities. And so there's no aspect of self-governance in this FCC order at all. It's just a dictation by 3 unelected bureaucrats who happen to have been in the right place at the right time. So the FCC small statute order, which actually Gail's going to talk more about. There is a federal bill that was introduced by a Democratic congressman from California to undo the FCC small cell order. There's a Senate companion, but there's no Democratic, it's all sponsored by Democrats so far. There's no bipartisan support for that. Just wanted to mention that aspect of federal law. The FCC cable franchise fee order, as I indicated, was issued in August. It becomes effective today, and what it basically provides is that in-kind services provided by a cable company pursuant to the requirements of their franchising authority are franchise fees under the Cable Act, and thus what they've basically concluded is that the fair market value of those in-kind services should either be subtracted from franchise fees, or the local government, the LFA, should not obtain those services any further, and either if they seek to still obtain those services, they're not going to get them for free. They're going to have to pay the going rate for those services they want to get them. So, this also preempts. It doesn't only preempt local government franchises that they've had with the cable companies for many, many years, and but this order also preempts state law. Florida has state cable franchising, as does, I believe, over 20 states around the country. So this also preempts inconsistent state statutes that require these in-kind services to the extent that the state statutes prohibit franchise fees that exceed the federal Cable Act franchise fee cap. So what this specifically is going to affect, and I indicated before that the FCC said that we should use the fair market value of those in-kind services that are being provided by the cable company pursuant to their franchise requirements. It's prospective only, so it doesn't apply retroactively. We don't have to give back the amounts that we've been getting from the cable company for those services in the past. And there are going to be appeals of this FCC order. I know NATOA is involved in considering that. The specific things that it affects are the in-kind free services provided to government buildings, schools, and libraries. And in most cases, Typically, those are just limited to cable services. Under some local franchises, that may include other services. But Florida statute, for example, provides that the cable companies, the LFA in Florida is the Secretary of State. Florida statute provides that in-kind services include free cable service to schools, libraries, and government administrative buildings. And in most cases, the cable companies are also providing free basic cable services to police stations and fire stations. So it's a real question as to whether those things are going to go away. It's really an analysis of state law, in addition to the FCC order, which for those states that have state cable franchising is going to be a more complicated analysis, because there may be an independent basis under the state statutes to continue requiring those services, even though the FCC said that under Federal Cable Act, those services are franchise fees, and if you're getting the maximum franchise fee monetarily, you have to subtract the fair market value of those services or discontinue receiving them. It's also going to affect the PEG services. The FCC, pursuant to the Cable Act, carved out capital, so it doesn't affect capital costs associated with PEG services. And everyone here knows what PEG is, and when I explain this at a state level, they don't understand PEG, so I have to explain what PEG is. But so the capital used to build and operate your PEG channels are not included as franchise fees, but the operational costs for transport of PEG signal is included in the FCC's definition of what constitutes a franchise fee. And we don't know exactly what the fair market value of that is. And so it's going to be very interesting to determine how the cable industry responds to this order, because only it really knows what the fair market value is of a PEG transport service. So that's still up in the air. With respect to the PEG channel capacity, the number of PEG channels that you have, the real estate of those channels, the FCC said there wasn't enough information in the record currently to make a determination as to whether the channel capacity should be considered a franchise fee. So that's going to be something for future determination. And that's, obviously of tremendous import to local governments, some of which have several channels. And then for states that allow institutional networks or franchise agreements that provide for institutional networks, the FCC concluded that institutional networks pursuant to state statute or franchise agreements also are in-kind services, and the fair market value of institutional networks should be subtracted if you're getting the maximum monetary franchise fee, or you can discontinue getting the institutional network, and then if you want, buy service on the market. By the way, so this, as I indicated, this order becomes effective today. There's no stay in place. So local governments that have these services have to start thinking about what they want to do from a budgetary standpoint, from an operational standpoint with respect to these services, whether they want to continue receiving them, whether they want to abandon them, or whether they want to try and provide them on their own or go out with RFPs to try and get them from other sources, because there are a lot of sources that provide these services now. And it might be interesting to cable to find out that you're no longer going to subscribe to cable or buy their enterprise services, but you'll buy it from one of their competitors, or get satellite service if you want basically video service in your government buildings and facilities, because there are a lot of competitors to cable, or do what everybody else in our communities is doing, is just streaming services and dropping cable altogether. All right, so I was going to talk about the state statutes with respect to small cell facilities. How am I doing on time? Okay. Oh, good. All right. So I'm going to show, I know you've seen a lot of pictures of small cell installations. Some of these I basically begged, borrowed, and stole from other sites. Some I've taken myself. These are kind of typical small cell facilities installed in various jurisdictions, various neighborhoods. You see the pole, you see the small cell facility, in these cases on top of the pole. Some more pictures of small cell facilities there. There's the small wireless facility, the pizza pie 28 cubic foot box that houses the equipment for the small cell facility. And the slide on the right is the, I don't know if there's a pointer on this, there, is made to look like a garbage can or some other streetscape furniture. In this case, it's located on the corner near the small cell facility. This one is a small cell facility in downtown Cleveland. The city requires that that they're shrink wrapped, and actually had an art contest to determine the art for the shrink wrapping. This stands, by the way, about 6 foot tall. These are fairly large. I call them the size of refrigerators, not a pizza pie box. Let's see if we can get to the next one. This is a picture of a micro wireless facility. These are pursuant to state statute. These can be installed by cable companies on strands hanging over the public rights of way. They're very, very limited in dimension. So a lot of state statutes allow the local government to confirm the dimensions of these facilities. Under the Florida state statute, these are exempt from permitting, so these don't even require a local permit to be installed. So in addition to the actual small cell facility pole and the antenna facility and the equipment box, all small cell facilities need to be connected to the network, and that's called the backhaul facilities that the companies will install. So this occurred in a city in Florida in May 2018. Installing anything underground, with respect to all the facilities and utilities already existing underground, is dangerous. Anytime you're doing excavation to install more work underground, it's a dangerous activity. In this case, there was a fiber installation on behalf of AT&T by its contractor. This is Cooper City, Florida. It happens to be in Broward County on the other side of the state. And they hit a water main, which created a sinkhole, which blocked the only entrance to a neighborhood for the entire weekend. So explain that to your mayor and city official when you go back home as to just, unabashed acceptance and permitting of installation of fiber underground without making sure that you get the correct engineering information. There can be a lot of problems with respect to that. This was another example of installation of underground fiber that went wrong. You may have read about this or heard about it on CNN. This was only a couple months ago. There was a contractor doing work for actually the electric utility in Fort Lauderdale. It was not a licensed contractor, but it was a qualifier. So they don't have a state license, but they're able to use another contractor's license, believe it or not. That's legal under Florida law. This company had been in business only since March 2019, had a total of 10 employees. They hit a 42-inch water main on July 17th. They were working on property of the airport. So they, I don't know if you can sort of see the damage that they created in the rights-of-way there. But the Fort Lauderdale provides water service and sewer service to the city of Fort Lauderdale, the airport, and 7 other municipalities in Broward County. All of these businesses, residents, were without water service for 3 days as a result of the break of this water main. So there's a lot of lawsuits, because when you close a law firm, they're going to sue and try and get money from somebody. But there's a lot of lawsuits from the restaurants, the bars, et cetera, that had to close over the weekend while they had no water service. And, the contractors basically, or the qualifiers already basically out of business. And so we'll see if FP&L can be held liable for the damage that its qualifier did. But the point is that local governments still have the ability, and actually, in my mind, the obligation to regulate the installation of backhaul facilities. You may be preempted by state statute in large respect with respect to the installation and applications for small cell facilities. They've adopted shot clocks. There's very, very limited grounds to deny an application to install a small wireless facility in the rights-of-way. But you basically have a lot of discretion and engineering authority when it comes to the installation of the backhaul facilities underground. And it's my mind that it's criminal on behalf of local governments to not exercise their full authority with respect to the installation of these facilities underground, because these types of incidences are not uncommon, and they're occurring more and more around the country. And in fact, you talk to any public works director anywhere, and they will have examples of similar types of incidences occurring in their jurisdictions. So you really need to make sure that your codes are up to date with respect to your authority to regulate the installation of backhaul facilities underground. So just a little bit of the Florida statute, and as I indicated, this is similar to other state statutes. In many respects, they mirror the FCC order. There's shot clocks. They provide what your applicable code should be with respect to how you regulate these facilities and the details of what you require for their installation. They have, in state law, they can have some exemptions and some carve-outs that don't exist under the FCC order, because the legislative process in the state level is often very different from what would occur at the FCC level. In Florida, it was known as the Advanced Wireless Infrastructure Deployment Act. Same kind of limits on local authority that the FCC order has. And so the litigation is the Florida League of Cities and a few individual cities in Florida are challenging certain portions of the state statute. We just filed this lawsuit a few months ago. The responses were just submitted actually this week. We're suing a couple state officials, the appropriate state officials. We're basically challenging the ability to co-locate facilities on city municipal poles, municipal utility poles, for a maximum fee of $150 per year. It's basically a taking of government property, and it's not going through the constitutional requirements that are generally required for a taking of property. So we'll see how that litigation goes, but it's nice to be able to push back every once in a while from the preemption that's occurring at the state level as well as at the federal level. And with that, I will be around to answer questions. And you know, one of the things that we should probably talk about, maybe we'll have time to do it when we talk about questions, is the policy that's being used at the federal level and even in the state legislative level with respect to the installation of these facilities. So far, the policy has been one of preemption, but it doesn't mean that local governments have to adopt that policy. We can go back to what we've always done and incentivize the use of new technology through our land development codes. DC is a good example of a jurisdiction that's doing that, but there's many jurisdictions that have historical property and other things that they were trying to protect in their jurisdictions. And so they're incentivizing locating facilities in other areas or locating facilities underground in certain locations. So I know we're short on time, and hopefully we'll have some time after everybody's presentation to answer some questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here at the last part of the conference when the weather's been so nice and we've been inside a lot. I don't have any funky Blockbuster photo, but I do remember that every time I went to Blockbuster when I was a kid, they never had the video I wanted. It was always out. Anyway, I'm going to focus mostly on small cell, small wireless facilities and what the FCC's been doing in that area. That they've been very active. You probably, if you're a good NATOA member, you've been on webinars or you've been on other panels. So a lot of this may be information that you've already learned. So think of it as like a summary and just checking the box that you really did learn it. And I'll just get started. So why is the FCC so active on wireless? They really are focused on wireless in the public right-of-way now and small wireless facilities because that's where the industry wants to put the next wave of deployments. They're still putting in macro cell sites, but they're filling in capacity and they're expanding their networks closer and closer to the user, as we'll see. They've been very active. The industry has been very active both at the state level and at the federal level. So you have a bunch of state law bills and state small cell bills, but you'll see it's the same playbook at the FCC as well, so very similar things I'll be talking about in the orders that have showed up and that Gary already mentioned are in Florida and other states. So I'm going to go over the technology a little bit just so that we're all on the same page in terms of terminology, and then go through some of the FCC activities. So this is a macro wireless facility. every wireless facility basically has the same components, whether it's large or small. There's antennas, there's equipment that is, the antennas are communicating with the handsets or other wireless devices. The equipment and the cabling translates that wireless into something that's it can be a wired transmission. You have a support structure of some sort, right? A utility pole, a street light, a macro tower. You have a power source, and you have backhaul. Most of wireless communications actually is over wired networks. It's really just between the handsets and the antennas that is the bulk of the wireless component. So all of those things that you see in a macro, you're going to see in a small cell too. They just might be arranged a little differently. A small cell just means smaller coverage area. It doesn't mean smaller facility necessarily, right? Sometimes they are smaller, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily will be. Distributed antenna system, you hear that terminology sometimes. That's just another configuration of small wireless facilities where the antennas are all on poles that are connected with fiber together, and most of the equipment can be off the right-of-way. 5G, we hear 5G all the time. 5G is not a particular technology. It's the next generation of wireless deployment. It can be, you're going to see, you see arguments or the case being made that we need these changes in state law or at the federal level so that we can do 5G deployments. But the actual changes are not to do 5G deployments. They're to do small wireless deployments, and they're 4G, 5G, different types of spectrum. But there is one type of spectrum that will be used more as we do get into what they mean by 5G, and that is millimeter wave, and that does have different characteristics than some of the other licensed spectrum that they've been using so far. It has a lot of capacity, but it can't travel that far too well without being, impacted by trees or other things that might affect the delivery of the signal. So that's one of the reasons why there's such a push to have more antennas closer to users, and the public right-of-way is a great place to do that. And it also, when you saw Gary talking about the fiber going in, if you're going to put in more capacity and more antennas that are serving locally, they need a ton more backhaul, and that means a lot more fiber. So small wireless facilities means, although the definition of a small wireless facility doesn't include the backhaul, you're going to get all kinds of applications for backhaul too, and that's why you see the FCC orders are dealing with both wireless and wireline telecommunications facilities in the orders. Driving deployment, we all know why everyone has a cell phone or two or three and multiple other connected devices. It's not just about the wireless carriers deploying. We focus a lot on that when we're talking because that's what the FCC focuses on, but you have a lot of other sources of wireless facilities that are going into the public right-of-way, wireless carriers, telephone companies, cable operators. We talked about the Wi-Fi. Gas and electric and water utilities are putting in smart meters, and they put their data collection units often in the public right-of-way. There are a lot of municipal uses that you're seeing more, traffic and parking and those kinds of monitoring systems. And there's more to come because this is really a wireless kind of connectivity for a lot of different applications is the next wave of kind of technological development. So you've seen some pictures already. These are just a few more examples on light poles or mid-strand or on utility poles. Once you see these pictures and then you go for a walk anywhere, it kind of ruins your walk because you start noticing these things everywhere. It's like, what? Oh, I didn't know. I was in Atlanta at another conference before this one, and we went to see this redevelopment of the Beltline area, and it's beautiful trees and lakes, and they have new housing and these multi-dwelling housing and all this, and then I look across the lake, and all I can see is a small cell on a pole
shame.
Yeah, and it's ruined me for all these things. Okay, so there's a little technology background now. Let's look at what the FCC's been up to. So this is a list of the key provisions. This is not every provision of federal communications law, certainly nothing about cable on here, but the key ones with respect to wireless and telecommunication services are on this list. They were all adopted in 1996, with the exception of the one right in the middle, 47 U.S.C. 1455. That's Section 6409 that was adopted in 2012. That's the provision that says for certain types of changes, certain modifications to existing wireless facilities, local governments must approve, right? That's the only legislative change that's happened since 1996. All the action has been at the FCC. And most of the action on the wireless has happened since 2009. When did iPhones come out? Anyone know? 2007? Yeah. So that's really the time when we went from, more flip phones and things like that to having a computer in our pocket and using our phone more and more for data and everything you can imagine. And yeah, occasionally we actually talk on the phone, but I think if you kind of tracked what you do on your phone, it's mostly not talking anymore. And that's really driven that demand for more capacity and these deployments. And as the industry has tried to deploy more, and they've run into, oh, we have to get local approvals, and they don't like that too much. And so that's where there's been this push for shot clocks and for other preemption to just smooth the path for these deployments. So we had the shot clocks in 2009. Then in 2014, there was another shot clock and the interpretation of that 2012 law that requires local governments to approve certain types of changes to existing wireless facilities. And then they have the big things that we've been talking about a lot at this conference that happened in 2018 and in 2019. So we have 3 orders in 2018 and 1 or more in 2019 somethings. Making a noise there.
Oh, it's your phone.
My phone is ringing. How unusual.
I'm sure it's a robocall.
How unusual. I never get calls. Anyway.
It was a robocall.
Oh, it's the FCC calling. Okay, so I'm going to go through the 2018 orders really quick and sort of what's happened with them. 2018, the first order that came out that we don't pay that much attention to, but is pretty important, was the NEPA NHPA order. So that was when the FCC said, and this was in March of 2018, they said, we don't have to do any environmental or national historic preservation review at the federal level anymore for small wireless facilities because we really don't think they're going to have any impact on the environment or historical resources or anything like that. And by the way, if it did, the local governments could monitor that. So they said they didn't have to take any more, that it's not a federal undertaking, not a major federal action. Then in August, they issued the moratorium ban. Now this applies to wireless and wireline deployments, and basically said you can't have a moratorium on accepting applications, and you can't have anything that sort of walks like a duck or looks like a moratorium in any way. And they really defined moratorium, a de facto moratorium, very broadly. It was basically anything that might halt or suspend the acceptance, processing, approval of applications or permits in any manner akin to a express moratorium. So I've heard carriers say, well, if you are going to make us make an appointment to bring in our application, then that might be a moratorium. Like, it really has been kind of ridiculous. Anyway, so that was out there, and that went into effect immediately. So we're all living under that. I have not seen any actual cases brought, or it's just threats, right? It's just another stick that they can kind of whack us with when they want to complain.
The CTIA sued Tampa over its
Oh,
moratorium.
did they? Oh, but that was an express one?
We won, yeah, we won in federal court.
Ah, okay. Then, of course, the 2018 small cell order, we've talked quite a bit about that in other panels, but they defined small wireless facility and not so small, surprise, surprise, 28 cubic feet, 3 cubic foot antennas, 50 feet tall, all this stuff. They redefined effective prohibition. They changed the standard, tried to make it a softer standard that would be easier for the carriers to meet. They set two more shot clocks, a 60-day and a 90-day shot clock, 60 for co-locations, 90 for new installations. And then they limited the fees and the rents that could be charged by local governments, not directly like the state small cell bills that would say $50 a year, that's all you can pay. They did these as, because they had to kind of go through a legal fiction almost to get to the fees, they said that the fees that they set were presumptively reasonable, kind of safe harbor fees. So you don't have to use these fees, but if you use these fees, you can say to a carrier, I'm not creating an effective prohibition. And then they also adopted, for the first time, standards on how to judge whether your aesthetic regulation was not creating an effective prohibition. They basically said that your aesthetic standards would have to be reasonable, no more burdensome on wireless than on other infrastructure, and objective and published in advance. And published in advance meant published in advance of an application being submitted. And the idea is that a carrier can look at your list of requirements and pretty well guess what kind of a deployment they could submit and have be approved. They also, how am I doing for time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. They also held that just generally all permits and applications are subject to the FCC shot clocks and including appeals, and that if you were talking about co-location, and this is something that a lot of times we talk about co-location as, well, there's already a wireless facility, and if you add a wireless facility, that's a co-location. The FCC said no, a co-location just means you're adding a wireless facility to an existing structure. Then there was the cable in-kind order in 2019, and that order was the subject of other panels. I just want to point to the language on mixed use where they talk about small cells, and they say that a franchise, and this is a cable franchise, does not merely authorize the construction of a cable system, but also the management and operation of the cable system, which the FCC believes includes the installation of Wi-Fi and small cell antennas attached to the cable system. Go figure. There's been a lot of litigation on the FCC orders. All three of the 2018 orders have been appealed. The 2019 cable order has been appealed. We have our first decision already, and that was in August, the U.S. Court of Appeal in the D.C. Circuit on the, this is the NHPA and the NEPA order, and the FCC order was overturned, and they said some pretty interesting things. The court, they said that the order was arbitrary and capricious. They said that the FCC had not adequately addressed the possible harms of deregulation and the benefits of doing environmental and historic preservation review. They said that the FCC mischaracterized the small cell footprint. You know, the industry always talks about the pizza box, but the small wireless facility definition is 28 cubic feet and 50 feet tall and all that. And they said that the FCC they couldn't square this idea that the FCC had that small cell deployments would have no environmental impact when they were talking about as many as 800,000 small wireless facilities being deployed. The case that is in the Ninth Circuit on the other two 2018 orders, so that's the moratorium order and the small cell order, those appeals were all consolidated in the Ninth Circuit. They spent a brief moment, one of them in the 10th Circuit, but we got it moved to the Ninth and all consolidated. There was an attempt to get a stay when it was in the 10th Circuit. That was denied. So the orders are in effect, and the briefing is complete, and we're just waiting for a oral argument and then a decision. So that's moving along. City of Eugene, that's the 2019 cable order. That appeal was just filed. More local government parties are also appealing. The deadline to appeal is October 26th, thank you. And the FCC has requested to move that case to the 6th Circuit, and that's where some of the other FCC cable franchising orders had a more favorable, I guess they thought, decision for the FCC. And the FCC is not done. So there's a pending complaint that was filed by Verizon about Clark County, Nevada's fees. That's ongoing. There's also another proceeding that the FCC has started looking at the eligible facilities requests. So those are those requests, the 6409 requests that have to be approved. The FCC made very detailed rules on the size and all of that in 2014, but the industry's come back and said, no, that's not good enough. We want to change those rules. We want to make them more streamlined and easier to get approvals that are must be approved. And to give you an example of a case that is the kind of thing the FCC is, the carriers are unhappy about, is this case in Colorado, where part of the concealment, one of the things that kicks an application out of the box of being an eligible facilities request is that the change to the facility would defeat the concealment, and one of the elements of concealment in this instance was the height and the size of the facility, and the court found that did kick it out of the box because the change that the carrier was proposing would defeat that concealment. The industry is trying to get those height and expansion criteria in the eligible facilities requests rules to apply even to concealment. So this is an important case for that upheld a local government view, but that's kind of what's spurring the industry to change it. And that's it. So lots of stuff going on at the FCC. So pay attention, participate, educate, and stay on top of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Ken Feldman.
Thank you, Donna. Thanks for being here, everybody. This is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to be talking about any new proceedings. How many of you have been to public hearings lately for wireless facilities? You? Half, maybe? Who have witnessed citizens coming forward with concerns about radio frequency emissions? All right. Who's been in a position to advise elected officials or local government staff about the very limited regulatory authority that we have under federal law? All right, well, hopefully this information will help you both in understanding the concerns that the public has, which, while sometimes I think exaggerated, are real concerns, and also in advising your jurisdictions. So this is just the docket that currently has the FCC RF standards. The picture on the right is from the FCC's website on the Office of Engineering and Technology, OET. If you go to their page, they have a whole bunch of information on RF radiation, and the docket was from, let's see, they came up with the rules first in 2003. In 1993, they issued an order and a continued rulemaking to update the rule. So that's, 2013 is when they said they were going to start updating the rules. So when you think about being told that you have to act within 60 days, keep in mind the FCC in 2013 said that they were going to work on updating the rules. They haven't quite gotten around to that yet. So just to give you a little bit of a graphic, I will thank Dr. Jonathan Kramer for this, about how the RF emissions or exposure limits work. Here we have a ruler, 12 inches, and at the top of the ruler, that would be the current RF safety guidelines. At that 12-inch mark, imagine that is the level that radio frequency emissions cause a measurable increase in the temperature of living tissue. All right, the FCC limit is down there at 0.26 inches. That is the maximum exposure for the general population. And we basically have a 50-time margin. The maximum exposure is about 2% of the amount where you begin to see an increase in the temperature in human tissue. So about 50 times before you can say there's going to be an impact on human health. That's what we have here. Keep in mind that we're talking about measuring heat and thermal impact, and we'll talk more about some of the other impacts in a minute. So now we're going to talk a little bit of history. The Local and State Government Advisory Committee, which I had the privilege of chairing during the 6 years of its existence, made a recommendation to the Commission in 1997, rather. It was the 7th recommendation that LSGAC did. Just a little diversion. Why was this a big issue in 1997? Anybody remember? What?
Microwaves?
Microwaves? Nope.
96.
No, 1997. What happened the year before?
96 Act.
The 96 Act. Right, so we had all the macro towers. That was when they released all the spectrum, and we started seeing all these new companies called cell phone companies that were putting up towers everywhere. And they said, we're going to have thousands of these towers throughout the country. And people started freaking out, just like they're doing now. So the LSGAC recommended to the Commission, look, you've got these federal rules, but we should have the authority to require these companies to demonstrate that they're in compliance, that their RF emissions are within the standards. We should be able to require them to do testing. Our local taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for that. And that was kind of the push that we made back then. Now, another thing that the LSGAC did, again, with great help from Dr. Kramer, who volunteered his time, and we had our advisory committee work with the OET staff at the FCC, and we came out with this document called the Local Officials Guide to Radio Frequency Emissions. And one of the things we really try to do is to get something in plain English, because if you read some of the stuff on the OET website, which I'll show you some of that in a minute here, it's really hard for normal people to understand. So we tried to put something in plain English. Interestingly, while there's a lot of good information that the FCC wants you to know about radio frequency emissions on their website that you can easily find on the OEC page, you can't find this unless you search for it separately, because like many other things local government related at the FCC, it's been buried. So I've got the specific link to it. It's actually still pretty good information, although it's kind of out of date. It was done in the year 2000. It's got a lot of stick figures in it. So if we were able to update it, which the IAC, the Intergovernmental Advisory Committee, proposed to do over the last couple of years, but the FCC would not let the IAC do it, we would have had a better document. But this is still good information. It was given a lot of kudos by the chair, Chairman Kennard, and it actually was very helpful. And after this came out, the commission made a ruling and basically said, okay, we accept that you guys in local government have a legitimate interest here in making sure that the RF rules are followed. But they were very confident that this local officials guide would be a very helpful resource, and that we would use the information in that guide, or the industry would use the information in that guide to be able to demonstrate compliance. And they had in the quote here, there's footnote 49, and footnote 49 basically says that the information they have to give us is just to show us their affirmative obligation that they're in compliance for all sites that are not categorically excluded. Who's heard that term before? A site that's categorically excluded. Not too many of you. All right, we're going to talk more about that in a minute because it's important. I'll save it for that. What does this mean? Here's what I think we have the authority to do. You can make them in their application certify and give you representations that their site is engineered in such a way that it's going to comply with the federal standards. If it's a categorically excluded site under the FCC rules, there's really not that much more you can do at that point. If you have reason to believe that it's not in compliance, you can ask the FCC to look into it and investigate. But if it falls under this categorically excluded category, you really can't require the applicant to go out and do testing to prove that they're in compliance with the FCC regulations once the site becomes operational. If they're not categorically excluded, there are a few other things that you can do, but only those things that the company or the applicant is required to show the FCC to demonstrate that they're in compliance. So what does it mean to be categorically excluded? If it's not a building-mounted antenna, so something on a pole, it's got to be at least 10 meters, that's about 30 feet, from the lowest point of the antenna to human exposure, and the total of all power is 1,000 ERPs. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. If it's on building-mounted, 1,000 ERPs. If it's a PCS site, same thing about the 10 meters. Now, if you have small cells in your community that are probably over 30 feet, and you have some that are under 30 feet. So that means you have some sites going up right now that are categorically excluded, but some that are not category excluded. Most rooftop antennas, because of the way they emit, are not categorically excluded. I did some, I went to my source for all important information, Google, and learned that effective ERP means effective radiated power. It's synonymous with EIRP. Who knows what that stands for? Equivalent isotropically radiated power. Ooh. It's an IEEE standardized definition of directional radio frequency power emitted by a radio transmitter. Now, if you want to get information about this from the FCC, this is how they define it. I'm not even going to start trying to go into what this stuff means. I would just say that another way to describe this slide is that if Ken understood physics, he wouldn't have gone to law school. But basically, all kidding aside, it deals with the power that is being radiated from the site. So if you're not categorically excluded, and most sites actually are categorically excluded, depending upon the site and depending upon what they're emitting, they might have to add additional safety barriers. They might have to add signs. There's an FCC bulletin we'll talk about in a second, Bulletin 65, that has those requirements. And if signs and barriers are not sufficient, they will probably have to prepare and file an environmental assessment under NEPA. And if the EA comes back a certain way, they may have to do a full-blown environmental impact statement. And then, of course, they might have to do routine testing afterwards. Most of the sites that are going to be proposed in your community are not going to fall into this category, but that's what happens if you're not categorically excluded. So just a couple of FCC resources. There's Bulletin 56 and Bulletin 65. Robert Cleveland was kind of the main guru at the FCC who put these together. Some of you may have interacted with him in the past. This is important when you have citizens coming in and raising concerns, and you're trying to figure out, are they just over the top? Are they equivalent to the anti-vaccine people, and they're just, afraid of everything, or do they have something serious to say? Here's one thing that you should remember. These rules measure thermal effects, right? Heat. That was the science 20 years ago when these rules were put in place. And they found in this OET bulletin, look at the second bullet point, there is the possibility of non-thermal biological effects, but the science wasn't good enough then. Well, the science has changed between then and now, and there has been some determinations in some studies that there are molecular impacts. There are molecular changes that occur with different kinds of doses of RF emissions that are non-thermal, and at a minimum, that suggests that we probably ought to be studying this stuff a little bit more. The other thing to keep in mind is that the, oops, I lost my notes here. These FCC limits are limited in time. So when they come up with the maximum amount of RF exposure the general population can have, they're measured in times of 6 minutes of exposure or 30 minutes of exposure. They're not based upon long-term exposure. Anybody see why that's important today?
Yeah.
Right? You want to put an antenna right in front of somebody's house that might be shooting something into the bedroom window. We're not talking about 6 minutes of exposure. Maybe it's safe, maybe it's not. Has the FCC studied it and updated the rules? No. So in just a couple of things from Bulletin 65, remember these are exposure limits, how long we can be exposed to this before it's a health concern, not really emission limits. And they take into account the human body's absorption, but again, they are 10 meters above the ground, so we're looking at some sites that probably are not covered in these old rules. Now, what is the FCC's current position on this? So I mentioned they opened a docket in 2003, or they continued a docket in 2003, and in 2013 they committed to updating these rules. Somebody I was talking to recently pointed out that again, comparing this to some of the shot clocks they impose on us, this docket is almost old enough to vote. So that's where that stands. So fast forward to the next iteration of the FCC's Advisory Committee for Local Government, which is the IAC. And in 2018, the IAC basically said to the FCC, this is really important stuff. The number one complaint we get from residents is about these RF emissions, and you guys have made promises that you're going to update these standards, and before you do this major push to roll out 5G, you could really help us. We could partner together. This would be a great way for the FCC to work with local governments, give us a tool that we can use to explain to our citizens that here are the updated rules. We have studied them, and this stuff is safe. Please give us that tool before you go on this big push to deploy 5G. This was provided to the FCC in a white paper that the IAC did, specifically with a letter and a commitment, a verbal commitment that was made by the FCC staff that it would be filed in not just the RF docket, but in the small cell docket. Gail just mentioned these rules that we're appealing now. It never got filed in the docket. When that order came out in 2018, one of the first things I did was to look at the appendix to see all the comments and then see where they cited the LSGAC and how they addressed the LSGAC's recommendation. They didn't have to because they ignored it and they didn't put it in the docket. So that was the response that local governments got to that advice. Just recently, the chairman said that they are going to move forward. He's going to have he has supposedly circulated a draft item to where basically they're going to say, we don't need to do anything else. The old rules are still good. We'll apply the old rules to the new frequencies that are being used, and everything's fine. We thought that ruling might come out soon, but actually today is their open meeting for September. It was not on the agenda. So this is what he said he was going to do in August, but so far nothing is done. We're not sure what is coming next, but it's probably more of nothing. Now, if you want another view on this, and if you're interested in this, the best resource I can commend to you is to read the brief and the reply brief that Montgomery County, Maryland filed in the appeal of the small cell rules. So let me just go through some of the things that they pointed out. These standards are almost 25 years old. They're based on old science. The FCC should have, before coming out with a rule to promote 5G, evaluated the scientific studies that have been done over the last 25 years and determined whether we are adequately protecting public health and safety. The FCC did not do that. We are going to be seeing frequencies emitting RF radiation in a 5G environment that are not part of today's environments. They pointed out that the Commission's 96 rules didn't account for the non-thermal impacts, and that's something that they ought to do. Some of the scientific studies has shown that to be a problem, and of course we're densifying all these networks and putting up lots and lots of new poles. Other issues, they pointed out to the FCC that the agency said in 1996, research is ongoing, and we expect changes in these exposure limits will occur over time as we get more studies done. That's what the FCC said in 96. And in 93, again, another quote about the scientific research that was, actually, I think that's a typo. I think that was in 2003, not 1993, because they reference back to the 1996 decision. But here again, they're talking about, we know there's research going underway, we know there's more science, we know we need to update this. That was, of course, a former FCC, not this one. And Montgomery County pointed out there are numerous studies which they cited that identify some of these concerns. Whoops, what happened there? Is this the next one, or is that the same one? That's the next one. All right. Again, more detail on some of the things that these recent studies have found regarding toxicity and carcinogen. I can't even say it. Yes, what Gary said. DNA damage. There are biological effects here. Aside from the Montgomery County brief, I met with a couple of engineers from the University of Colorado who are very well respected and don't have a dog in this fight, and they were telling us about the studies that they're doing, which definitely shows there's some molecular changes that occur from this non-thermal radiation. Some of it may be good. There was a study that was pointed out to me where 100 rats that got nothing and 100 rats that got bombarded with non-ionizing radiation from what would be equivalent to 5G. And how am I doing on time? I'm done. Okay, we're going to wrap in a minute here. Where the rats that were bombarded had more tumors, but they also lived longer. Go figure. So here's right. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an RF engineer. I have learned enough about this to know that we need to study it more. There's reasons to study it more and to take these things into consideration. And concluding in Montgomery County, there's scientific evidence that demonstrates that. We ought to be looking at this more, and that the FCC violated NEPA and the APA when they ignored all that evidence in these new rules. So what should we do? This is the last slide. As local governments, we need to study where the limited regulatory authority have, so we can explain that to our elected officials. the little bit of authority we have, we need to exercise it, but we have to educate our local officials, and we got to lobby Congress to encourage the commission to do its job and update the rules so that we have some intelligent, helpful information we can share with our citizens. And with that, I will be happy to join my colleagues here in answering any questions that you may have.
So no, it's a lot of good information. Does anyone have any questions? We have a mic right up front. Run.
Since you did a pretty thorough job of going through the timeline and the details of the small cell, could you expand a little bit on the OTARD and how it connects to those two things, plus the potential comments we might get from citizens on health effects?
All right, I'll take OTARD. I actually thought I had a slide in there about OTARD, and then I realized I didn't. But, so the OTARD is over-the-air reception device. And the rules that were initially adopted, I don't remember what year, were really focused on the devices that you put in your home, or if you're in an apartment or a condo, on your balcony, to receive your satellite TV. That was a big part of why OTARD rules came out, that were preempting or limiting local authority to regulate and not only local governments, but HOAs and other like community or property, group associations, from limiting your ability to put up the device that you would need to receive satellite television. It also applied to some other sort of reception. And it was expanded at one point to include devices that would allow you to get wireless internet access. So there's wireless internet service providers out there, WISPs, that provide some wireless services, wireless internet connectivity through these devices. But the whole idea of the rule was so that it would be for customer receiving devices. And there is a petition by the Wireless Internet Service Provider Association, WISPA, seeking to have the rules expanded in a way that would allow for hub sites. So you, instead of just being customer receiving equipment, it could be a site that not only you might receive as a customer, but could be used to transmit the signals to other customers. And so where that fits in this other expansion of the FCC's attempt to preempt local authority would be one more source where potentially you would be unable as a local government to regulate those installations and expand the sort of another group that it could put wireless facilities just in a lot of places without aesthetic regulation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me just respond quickly to Alan's comment about what you're likely to hear from citizens. I put them in two different categories. One is you're going to hear about studies that show that these have negative health impacts and that they're going to demand that you must put a stop to this, City Council, until it's proven that it's safe. And you're going to be in a position, the City Attorney's Office is going to be in a position to have to explain to them, regardless of whether you believe this or not, it's not accurate, or it's not within the scope of your legal authority to stop it. You're also going to hear, well, there was a case here where this city was they were upheld and they got to do this. And is Brian Roberts here? I thought I saw Brian before. We were at a public hearing a couple of weeks ago. San Francisco just won a case where the court said, and they had a quote right from the court, that the police power to protect public health and safety is preserved. Well, you got to read these cases when you hear that stuff, because the San Francisco case was a challenge under state law, where the industry was saying under state law you can't require permits. And the court found, yes, you can require building permits for these things because under state law you have the right to protect public health and safety, and building permits follow that. Had absolutely nothing to do with the preemption under federal law about regulating under Section 332C7. So you have to research when the folks say, another example was Syracuse, New York, and Verizon, they made Verizon test every site that's going up. Well, not true. There's not a lot of 5G out there. There are a couple of test pilot cities. Syracuse was one of the first ones. I think it was for Verizon, and they agreed. Verizon agreed. There, we will randomly test some of the sites we put up to show you that they're not emitting beyond the scope of the FCC requirements. But you can't force them to do that, and they did that because they were an early adopter and a test site city. So you're going to hear complaints and examples of other communities that have stopped or slowed down 5G deployment, and you need to research those examples carefully so you can explain the other side of the story to your elected officials.
Thanks. Rick Elrod, Fairfax County. Ken, when you were talking about whether small cells would be categorically excluded, it sounded as if in the olden days there was a rule that local governments had the power to acquire companies to show that they were in compliance with the FCC rules. If that's correct, is that still true?
I don't have any information on sort of pre-1996 what the requirements were, but post-1996, most of the macro sites, the 120-foot towers that we saw go up in the late 90s, early 2000s, those all fell in the category of being categorically excluded. So you could require them to put in their application a representation that they will comply, but I don't think we had the legal authority to force them to comply. I'm not familiar with any communities that used to do that.
I would just add that what the practice that we've with the communities I work with mostly in California, but in other states as well, is that they require some representation or a study or something that shows that they're going to, the facility that they're proposing will, as they model it, would comply with the FCC standards. And then they often require, as a condition of approval, that they provide, once the facility is up and running, that they do another test and show that it's still in compliance as operating, actually as built. And then some have asked for periodic tests after that, and that's where you start to get a little bit more into a gray area. But I have seen some carriers agree to conditions of approval where they have to provide another test every 3 years or something like that. What you can't do, and you get some of the citizens who are concerned about RF emissions that say, oh, well, make them put something on so it's continuous monitoring and that kind of thing, where you can't create a whole regulatory regime for, ensuring compliance. But some of the periodic tests and reports have been passed muster with the carriers and give some level of comfort to the local jurisdictions and the residents.
Okay. Well, is there another question? Oh. And this will have to be our last one.
Baltimore County, and recently we've received a number of requests from individuals, and it looks like they're actually using something that's been put online under the ADA. They've been asking for a Title II building accommodation request, stating that there is an electromagnetic frequency concern that's creating a disability, and I was just wondering if you've encountered that, or and how you've seen people handle that request, because it seems to me that we have very little control over that and in granting an accommodation to where small cells are prospectively placed.
Right. I have. I mean, I've seen one of the jurisdictions I represent has a cancer cluster that's being studied by the CDC. And so the residents that live in that area have requested as an accommodation to have their neighborhood excluded from possible siting of small cell facilities. The county commission actually takes it pretty seriously and would like to accommodate them, but we've been told in no uncertain terms that this goes beyond the preemption of federal law of local jurisdiction, because we can't take into consideration the potential RF health effects of these facilities when granting or denying siting applications. So we've explained that to the residents. We've explained to them that it's an FCC preemption issue, and this county and others have adopted resolutions and sent them to the FCC in these federal dockets, and separately to the FCC commissioners and anybody else who will listen, their members of Congress, members of Senate, urging the FCC to update the standards. But I'm not aware of any jurisdiction, and a lot of jurisdictions are faced with these issues raised by the residents. It's not alone to, the 600 governments in Florida or elsewhere, but I'm not aware of any jurisdiction that has actually taken steps to accommodate the claims by these individuals under the ADA, but they do raise it.
Yeah.
We
Be an
had-
interesting claim. I mean, if somebody is ill, and files an ADA claim, I mean, it'd be an interesting case to, take through the process.
There is, I think, an ADA recognized disability of hypersensitivity to.
It's not ADA recognized, but it was in the Access Board. The Access Board did have a statement
Okay.
on that, makes recommendations to the ADA.
We had a situation recently where we had citizens come in and raise that.
Right.
And say, we need a special accommodation, and working with the county attorney, there's so many different potential ADA categories, and the county decided, and I think this was the right decision, not to single this out, but just to put a requirement in the license agreement when companies want to cite these is you must comply with all state and federal laws, including the ADA. And then if someone has a particular issue, they can bring it up and the Justice Department can look at it, and it's sort of out of the county's hand, but the county decided we're not going to separately say we're going to treat this kind of a potential ADA violation different than any other ADA violation.
What's interesting is one of the few things that hasn't been preempted from our authority in either the FCC order or the state statutes was compliance with the ADA. So, when the order came out and the statutes come out, they definitely mean size of sidewalks, size of roads, so that people can get wheelchairs through, whatever. So they'll be ADA compliant. I don't think, they were definitely not thinking about, people's sensitivity to RF emissions, but it doesn't say that. And so if a jurisdiction wants to make the interpretation that we will not cite facilities there because it would violate these residents' ADA rights, let the industry come back and challenge that.
Right, I mean, it seems like it raises a future possible claim of someone who has hypersensitivity and can prove it through non-invasive testing, saying there's been some sort of, if there's an overhang or if it's directionally sited, located near their house or towards their home, that there's been some sort of inverse condemnation.
Right. There's some, I mean, Ken mentioned this in the slides about the 35 feet and, how the standards were done before the new technology. OSHA standards do not allow technicians to climb these facilities while they're on. And if they're within 35 feet of kids' bedrooms, schools, whatever, because they are, we'll see what the FCC comes out with respect to its updated standards. But the question is, the larger question that's going to probably come up is if the FCC did not do a good enough job studying this, what's the procedure to challenge that? I don't know if you just challenge the FCC decision or if there's going to be separate actions, maintaining that the FCC, which has all authority, exclusive authority over this issue, is not protecting the health, safety, and welfare of Americans.
Right. And it's a tough thing because I think, as you say, like there's a lot of commissioners and council people and people in government who agree and concur and have sympathy to the claims,
Right.
and yet they're forced to take the position of a federal agency that
We're
hasn't
preempted.
updated its testing.
Right.
Yes, and those of us who have to advise local governments about that limited authority, I mean, even if we have sensitivity, even if we believe these claims, we get tagged with, I'm now a shill for the industry based upon what some of these people say, because I've been in front of county commissioners and city council members and said, regardless of what you think about this, there's just not a whole lot you can do.
Authority. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
One just general comment in this area, everyone has access to the internet, and they all, what you were saying is so true. They pick up things, they hear from other places, they misinterpret state, like court decisions. So you really do have to do your homework, because you'll get all of these claims, go, really? There were the 5 cities in California that banned 5G and they got away with it? No, probably not. So, check all of these things, because the groups find each other and sort of say the same things. in different jurisdictions all over the country.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you all. Thank you very much, Gail and Ken and Gary, for all the great information that you gave, and thank you for your time and your questions.